Good afternoon. This is Lydia Ford. I help people who are stuck in grief to get unstuck. And I am a grief counselor. My grief counseling service is called Grace to Win. And the last time that I came before you, I came on social media. I believe it was either last week or the week before that. I talked to you about the grieving process. I talked about normal grief, what normal grief is, and I gave you some information about grief reactions. We talked about the feelings that are experienced when someone loses a loved one. We talked about and everybody goes through some of these types of behaviors, grief reactions. Not everybody may not go through them, but a lot of folks that have lost loved ones do experience many of these types of reactions. We talked about feelings. First of all, that was the first category. We talked about feelings of sadness. We talked about anger. We talked about blame, guilt, and self-reproach. We talked about anxiety, loneliness, fatigue, helplessness, a sense of helplessness. We talked about shock, yearning, emancipation, relief, and numbness. And then we went to a different category. That was the category of feelings, the way people feel, the way they express their grief. And then we talked about physical sensations, the physical sensations associated with grief. The physical manifestations were a list, okay, a list of the most commonly reported sensations experienced by people we see for grief counseling. We talked about hollowness in the stomach, tightness in the chest, tightness in the throat, oversensitivity to noise, a sense of depersonalization, breathlessness, feeling short of breath, weakness in muscles, lack of energy, and dry mouth. Those are grief reactions associated with physical sensations or physical manifestations. Then there was another category called cognition. Cognition has to do with the mind, your thought processes. Certain thoughts are common in the early stages of grieving and usually disappear after a short time, but sometimes thoughts persist and trigger feelings that can lead to depression or anxiety. In this category, we talked about the thought processes of disbelief. The person has a hard time believing, accepting the death of a loved one. We talked about confusion, and sometimes people are very confused in their thought patterns. We talked about preoccupation. Preoccupations can be obsessive thoughts about the deceased. We talked about sense of presence. This is the cognitive counterpart to the experience of yearning. The grieving person may think that the deceased is somehow still in the current area of time and space. This is cognitions. And then we talked about hallucinations. It's not uncommon for people to hallucinate. And then there was another category called behaviors. There are a number of specific behaviors frequently associated with normal. We're talking about normal grief reactions. Sleep disturbances is one of those reactions. Eating disturbances, distracted and absent mindedness, social withdrawal, dreaming about the deceased. We talked about searching and calling out for that individual. Sighing is another one. Restless, hyperactivity, crying. All of these are manifestations, behavior manifestations that many people, not all, will experience all of these things that I'm describing, but a lot of people do. And all of these reactions are within the realm of normal grief patterns. These are the patterns, these are the normal grief reactions that a grief counselor will encounter when she goes through the process of counseling a candidate, a counselee who has experienced the loss of a loved one. Now, today, what I want to focus on is understanding the mourning process. Okay, understanding the mourning process. In this book that I am reading, because I am going for my certification in grief counseling, this individual, the author, William Warden, uses the term mourning to indicate the process that occurs after a loss by which a bereaved person comes to term with the loss. Grief, on the other hand, refers to a person's reaction. That's why I just gave you all of that information about feelings and cognition, and physical sensations that accompany the person who's grieving. Some have physical manifestations, they have behavioral manifestations, and they have feelings. All right. So grief refers to a person's reactions to bereavement, comprised of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors experienced after the loss, and these change over time. Since mourning is a process, it's been viewed by different theorists in a lot of different ways. Primarily, the model that many clinicians use is stages, the word stages or the word phases or task. Okay. I'll say that again. Since mourning is a process, it has been viewed by different theorists in various ways, such as different ways, primary as stages, phases, and tasks. Now, stages, okay, is one model. One way to look at the mourning process is to view it in terms of stages. Many people writing on the subject of grief have listed up to 9 stages of mourning, and at least one person lists 12 stages of mourning. One of the difficulties, however, with using the stage approach is that people do not pass through all of them in order. Also, there's a tendency for the novice counselor, one that has not had a lot of experience, to take the stages too literally and expect their client to go through every stage in the order that it's listed. An example of this is the way that people responded to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of dying. After her first book, which was called On Death and Dying in 1969, Kubler-Ross, many people expected dying patients to go through all the stages she listed in some neat little order, and some were very disappointed if a patient skipped a stage. Her stages of dying have also been used to describe the mourning process with the same limitations. All right. And then another model that clinicians use is what we call phases. I just talked to you about stages. This one is called phases, an alternative approach to stages. It's the concept of phases by Parks, Bowlby, Sanders, and others. Parks defines 4 phases of mourning. Phase 1 is the period of numbness that occurs close to the time of the loss. This numbness, and I talked about this previously, which is experienced by most survivors, helps them to disregard the fact of the loss, at least for a brief period of time. Then the person goes to phase number 2. And phase 2, there's the phase of yearning, in which he or she yearns for the lost person to return and tends, watch this, to deny the permanency of the loss. Anger plays an important part of this phase. Now, in phase number 3, the phase of disorganization and despair, the bereaved person finds it difficult to function in the environment. And then finally, he or she is able to enter phase number 4. In this phase, the phase of reorganized behavior, it begins to pull, the person begins to pull himself or herself back together. This is according to Parks, 1972. And so Parks and this other individual, Priggeson, 2010, Bowlby, 1980, their work and interests kind of overlap with those of Parks. And it re-emphasizes or it reinforces the idea of phases and suggests that the mourner must pass through a similar series of phases before mourning is finally resolved. As with stages that I talked about previously, there are always going to be overlaps between the various phases, and they are seldom separate or distinct. Saunders, another clinician or a theorist in 1989, 1999, has also used the idea of phases to describe the mourning process. And she describes 5 of them. The first one is shock, awareness of the loss, conservation with withdrawal. The fourth one is healing, and the fifth one is renewal. And then that brings me to another model for counseling or dealing with people who have suffered loss, people who are now going through mourning. And that's the model that this author uses and describes in this book that I'm going to talk to you about, not in this recording, but in another recording. And that model is called TASK. That is the one that I currently subscribe to, the one that I currently use with one of my counselees. So TASK, he says, although I have no quarrel with Bowlby or Parks and Saunders and their schemata of phasing, I think the task, because when you think about task, you think about a job, okay? The task of mourning concept that I present in this book offers an equally valid understanding of the mourning process and is much more useful for the clinician. Because watch this, phases imply a certain passivity, something that the mourner must pass through. Okay, you can kind of be very passive about going from phase to phase to phase. However, the task concept, on the other hand, is much more consonant with Freud, Sigmund Freud's concept of grief work. And it implies that the mourner needs, watch this, to take action to do something. That's why I like the task model, because it puts the ball in the grievers, in the counselee's hand, letting them know that this is grief work and you got to bust a move. You got to do something, okay? You got to take action and do something. Also, this approach implies that mourning can be influenced by intervention from the outside. I'll say that again. Mourning, the process, can be mitigated. It can be influenced, all right, by some intervention from the outside. Okay, and you're not looking to, God to just transform your life overnight to supernaturally heal you from all your hurt, from all your pain, from all your memories. No, God can heal, but many times God uses outside intervention. He uses people. And I say that, I'm going to keep saying that, to help you get through certain stages and certain phases of the grieving process. All right. So this approach implies that mourning can be influenced by intervention from the outside. In other words, the mourner may see the phases as something to be passed through, whereas the task approach can give the mourner some sense of leverage and hope that there is something that he or she can actively do to adapt to the death of a loved one. There is obvious validity to both of these approaches. Grieving is something that does take time. I say it all the time. However, the often repeated phrase, time heals all wounds, is only partially true. Yes, time does heal all wounds, but that's only partially true. Healing comes from what the griever person does with that time. I'll say it again. Healing comes from what the grieving person does with that time. There is also truth to the notion that mourning creates tasks that need to be addressed. And although this may seem overwhelming to the person that's in the throes of acute grief, it can, with the facilitation of a counselor, often hope that something can be done, that there is a way out, there is a way through it. This can be a powerful antidote to the feeling that many experience. Many experience helplessness. Many people think they cannot make it when that person that fulfilled a role or a job or a task is no longer there. They feel helpless, all right? They feel helpless. And many mourners experience that. All human growth and development can be seen as influenced by various developmental tasks. Okay? There are certain developmental tasks, mental, physical, social, and emotionally, that occur as a child grows. They grow developmentally in physical, mental, social, emotional aspects. So if the child does not complete a particular task on a lower level, if that child never learns how to feed himself, if that child never learns how to take care of his bodily functions, like go to the bathroom appropriately, sit on the toilet, don't poop in their, diaper or underpants, they still pooping at 5 and 6 and 7. They missed something. They missed a step. Okay. So if children have to complete a particular task on a lower level, then the child's adaptation, I should say, if they don't complete a particular task on a lower level, then that child's adaptation can be impaired when trying to complete similar tasks at a higher level. Now, borrowing from developmental psychology, this author sees mourning, the adaptation to loss, as involving 4 tasks. I'll say that again. Borrowing from the developmental stages that children go through, this author and this counselor see mourning, the adaptation to loss, as something that involves 4 basic tasks, all right, that's outlined in this particular book that I'm reading. It is essential that the grieving person address the issue of these tasks in order to adapt to the loss. Bereaved individuals make many adaptations to the loss of a loved one. Some make a better adaptation and some a less good adaptation. Although the tasks do not need to be addressed in any specific order, there is some order suggested in their definition. For example, you cannot handle the emotional impact of a loss until you first come to terms with the fact that the loss has happened and is irreversible, at least in this lifetime. Okay. Since mourning is a process and not a state or a condition, the following tasks require work. They require effort. However, not every death loss we experience challenges these tasks in a similar way or in the same way. So grief is a cognitive, it's a thought process involving confrontation with and restructuring, okay, transformation of thoughts about the deceased, the loss of experience, and the changed world within which the bereaved, the survivor must now live. And some would call this grief work. Let me just say that as I get ready to close. However, not every death loss we experience challenges these tasks in the same way, because grief is a cognitive, it's a mental, thought-provoking process involving you confronting, all right, the truth, okay, the truth that someone died. It's permanent and they are not coming back. And so with a task, it confronts your reconstruction of thoughts around the deceased, around the loss experience, and the changed world in which the survivor must now live. Okay, I gave you a lot. I talked about 3 types or 3 models that clinicians use in their grief counseling. We talked about some use the stages methodology. Some use the phases methodology. And the last one I just talked about was the task model, which this author delineates and talks a lot about in this book. It's also the model that I choose to use with some of my counselees. So I'm going to list the 4 tasks, Because when you think about task, you should immediately think about a job. You should immediately think about work, because it's work. Grief, you have to put in the work. If you want good results, then you have to confront these issues, okay? The task of mourning. Task one is to accept the reality of the loss. That's task number one. Task number two is to process, watch this, the pain of grief. And that takes a long time, okay? For many people, it takes a long time. That's task two. That's work, because you got to put in the work to really process the pain. You can't just be all stoic and all holy and righteous and like, oh, I don't need grief counseling. Oh, I can get over this. Oh, I know the word. Oh, I speak in tongues. Oh, it was prophesied that this was going to happen, so I saw it coming, so I don't need to listen. The devil is a lie. Ultimately, some of this stuff is going to backfire, and it's going to come at you in feelings, in physical sensations, in behavior. It's going to show up. All right. So task two is to process the pain of grief. You can't fake it. No, you can't fake it till you make it. No. Then task three, to adjust to a world. This is really, really important. When you get to this point, you know you are more than halfway there. To adjust to a world without the deceased. Many people have a hard time adjusting to a world, an environment without that person. Why? Because their identity was so closely tied to that person, what they did, okay, a task or a role they fulfilled. And when that role and that task and that office is no longer there, people have a hard time. They feel a sense of of helplessness. They feel that they can't go on without that person. All right. But your life is never tied to anything that you have lost. Your identity is in your creator, the one that created you, the one that knew you before you were even born, the one that knows the plans he has for you. All right. But the importance here in task three is to adjust and to adapt and to know that you still have a purpose. You still have passion. You still have God still has a plan for you, and that you can go on and you can not just cope with the death or the loss. No, but you can thrive with knowing that that person is no longer here, but you are here. And you are planted, okay? And you can process, you can be delivered, you can be retransformed, you can have your life reconstructed, okay, with new hope, new fervor, new passion, and assist others, all right, in going through what you went through, being a testimony, all right? So that's task number three. That takes a while to adjust over without the deceased. And the last task, now we're going to talk about is to find a way to remember. This is important. Remember the deceased while embarking on the rest of your life's journey. Find ways to healthily remember the deceased while embarking on the road to recovery, the road to living your best life, the road to the rest of your journey. Don't put a period where God has just put a comma. In other words, turn the page. Turn the page. Leave the past in the past. Find a way to remember that individual. Turn the page or start a brand new chapter or write a whole new book. You don't have to become bitter. You can become better. And God can take your messy life. He can take your misery and give you a message and even give you a ministry. You just don't know. So today we talked about the task of mourning, the process of mourning, understanding that there are different concepts, there are different models that different clinicians use. I'm not speaking negatively on the phase model, the stages model, or the task model. You know, it's up to the counselor when they're going through their interview, when they're talking with their counselee. They might start it with one model and then they might change and decide to take up another model that would be more efficient, a little better suited for that person. Okay, so I hope you got something. When I come back, we're going to talk about these different tasks. And it's going to take me a minute to get through. It's going to take me a minute to get through these different 4 tasks because there's a lot of information there. I'm going to try to kind of scrunch it together so I'm not giving you, all these different clinicians, all these theorists, and all these experts. Sometimes it's like scripture. You give people too much scripture and they lose the context. They don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to try to give you more context and not so much information on who said it and when they said it. And, I may use some of that, but I will try not to bore you. All right. This is Pastor Lydia Ford or Lydia Ford. I help people who are stuck in grief to get unstuck. And you can follow me on my, I didn't even put up my banners. My bad. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I think I put the wrong color banner up. Let's see here. Okay, let's see. It's okay if it's purple. It's okay if it's purple. I will do better. Oh, let's see if I can fix it because I have different colors for different. That's the other one. I have different colors for different ministries. Let's see. This is the one for building fruitful friendship. Oh, here's the thing with Jake. This is for grief counseling. Okay. I didn't even know I had a green one for grief counseling. Here we go. But you can see the information on the bottom. I would love to stand in the gap and help you as you manage and move forward in your grief process. You can go to my website, www.thegrace, and it's the number 2, the grace to win. You can fill out some information there. I will give you a 30-minute consultation to see if you are a candidate for grief counseling. And if you're not the candidate, maybe you know somebody that you would like to recommend for grief counseling. All right. It's all the ways that you can get in touch with me at the bottom. It's scrolling at the bottom. I love StreamYard because it gives a lot of information and I don't have to talk so much. Okay. I will be back at another time to give you more information. All right. About my grief counseling business, and my grief counseling business is called Grace to Win. Get in touch with me today. Do it today and don't delay. All right. Your future, your best life is still in front, not in the rear view mirror. Your future is never tied to anything that you lost, but it's always in front of you. You just need somebody to help unpack some of the things that you've been suppressing, some of the things that you might be still confused about. You just need a little help. And here, God is sending you help today. Reach out and touch the help that He has right in front of you today. God bless you and see you next time.